Hello there, soul who's listening. If right now you feel like your mind is carrying too many thoughts, like you've spoken to 100 people today, and yet, somehow, you still feel alone, then maybe, just maybe, the universe has brought you here, at the perfect moment. Because in the next few minutes, you're going to hear something familiar. You're going to hear yourself hidden somewhere inside this story. They say Gemini is the sign of intelligence and connection. But few ever speak about what lies behind that quick smile, behind those sharp, sparkling eyes, a soul that has been quiet for a long time, holding itself together between two worlds. One that belongs to humanity, and one that whispers from the universe. Tonight, I want to tell you the story of that soul, the journey of Gemini, from loneliness to awakening, from the noise of the mind to the whisper of the divine. And it all begins in the deepest place within, where Gemini first realizes that inside them, two worlds have always existed. Gemini are souls that carry two worlds inside one heart. One world is bright and alive, full of laughter, words, and motion, where they shine easily among the crowd. And the other is quiet, like the sky after rain, a place where only they exist with themselves. In that silence live the questions without answers, the memories that never found a name, and the kind of loneliness that breathes softly, just enough to remind them it's still there. People see a Gemini who's quick, clever, always in motion, but few ever notice the ocean of thoughts hidden behind their eyes. There are days when Gemini feels like a radio that never stops receiving signals, catching every emotion, every frequency from the world without a switch to turn it off. They hear the unspoken words in others, they understand feelings no one admits, and yet no one truly hears them. So they smile to hide, they speak so they won't have to face silence, they observe so they won't get hurt. The world only sees the surface, but deep within, Gemini is learning how to make peace with their own storms. In truth, they never wanted to be strong all the time. They just wanted to relax, to be still, even for a few seconds in the rush of life. But Gemini knows no one can rescue them except themselves. And so, on sleepless nights, they begin their first real conversation not with anyone else, but with the twin soul inside. One side asks, the other listens. One trembles, the other comforts. And somewhere in those quiet moments, they realize they were never truly alone. They were simply learning how to love themselves at the deepest level. Loneliness, once a dark shadow following them, becomes a gentle friend, a teacher showing them where they've been, what they've survived. They start to see beauty in silence, in breathing, in mornings that don't rush anywhere. Scattered pieces of emotion slowly come together, forming a soft symphony of peace. Mind and heart, two forces that once pulled apart, finally begin to speak the same language, weaving together into a rhythm both calm and alive. It's in that moment when the world outside starts to fade and the light within begins to glow. A light not blinding, but tender, warm enough to reach the forgotten corners of their being. You can almost feel it, as if Gemini is walking through an invisible doorway, where they no longer speak to be understood, but speak to be free. And as their breath slows, deep and calm, you can sense it, the story is shifting, quietly, into its next chapter. A place where Gemini will no longer struggle to live between two worlds, but finally learn how to bring them together into one whole, peaceful, and radiant world. Perhaps no one understands the weight of intelligence quite like Gemini. The sharper their mind, the more they see what others overlook, the more sensitive their heart, the deeper they feel the things no one dares to say out loud. In their mind, every story has two sides. Every person wears two faces. Every emotion moves in two directions, one reaching outward to the world, the other sinking inward toward the soul. And sometimes, they can no longer tell which one is real. Gemini's mind is a river that never stops moving, calm on the surface, yet full of hidden currents below. Others see still water, but beneath it swirl questions, memories, and thoughts never spoken. Whenever the world grows quiet, their mind grows loud, hundreds of voices, memories, ideas rushing in at once. They analyze, remember, imagine, empathize. They want to stop, but they can't. Like a driver lost in fog, they know they should slow down, yet they're afraid that if they stop, they'll never find the road again. The world calls them talkers, storytellers, but few realize that their words are really a way to calm the storm inside. They smile to cover the exhaustion of a mind that never sleeps. They tell stories to avoid the silence that grows louder each day. Because when silence lasts too long, every thought they've ever buried comes rushing back like a strong wind sweeping through a forest of restless memories. There are days when Gemini feels trapped inside a golden cage built from their own intelligence. It lets them see through people, through love, through time itself, but it also robs them of simple faith. They see both the light and the shadow in every gesture, every word. They want to believe in the good, but reason always whispers, "Don't forget, everything has another side." So even when surrounded by laughter, Gemini remains quietly alone, not because no one is there, but because few can dive deep enough down to that third, even fourth layer of thought, where the world becomes a collage of emotion and intuition only they can navigate. And yet, within that overload, a small light begins to flicker, a realization that maybe they don't have to understand everything to be at peace, that sometimes letting go of a question is its own kind of wisdom. And when the tired mind finally softens, another sound emerges faint, gentle, but real, the voice of the heart. From that moment on, Gemini's journey shifts. Their intellect is no longer a burden, but a doorway, a bridge leading them toward the stillness they've been searching for all along. There is a particular kind of pain only Gemini truly understands, the feeling of being seen, yet never really understood, of being listened to, yet never truly heard. All their life, they've been given easy labels: inconsistent, talkative, two-faced. But behind those words lies a trembling soul, afraid of being hurt. They don't change because they're fickle, they change because they're trying to survive misunderstanding. Gemini are masters of storytelling. They know how to make others laugh, how to turn a silent room into one that sparkles with life. But what few people know is that every smile is a wall, every story is a thin mist covering what they're not ready to reveal. Inside, they fear the moment their emotions are stripped bare, the moment they might have to face the question, will anyone ever truly understand me? So, little by little, Gemini withdraw. Not loudly, not in anger, just quietly. It isn't apathy, it's exhaustion. They stop sharing, stop explaining, stop trying to be seen. Because the more they speak, the more they're misunderstood. Their voice, once their greatest strength, becomes the wound that makes them close the doors of their heart. Those who once glowed in crowds now shrink into smaller spaces. They begin to talk with silence like an old friend. Silence doesn't betray, doesn't judge, doesn't demand joy. And in that stillness, Gemini begins to realize they were never afraid of being misunderstood. They were afraid no one would stay long enough to understand. Yet here lies the paradox: the deeper they hide in silence, the clearer their own voice becomes. In sleepless nights, in the gaps of unfinished conversations, they start to see not everyone is meant to understand them. Some languages are meant only for the soul, and sometimes being understood matters less than simply being real. When Gemini finally accepts that silence isn't a cage but a doorway inward, something shifts, fear dissolves, and peace begins to take its place. And in that instant, they feel a part of their soul set free, lighter, brighter, and ready to step into a deeper layer of themselves. A place where they learn the most sacred truth of all: how to speak without words, how to listen without sound, and how to love without the fear of ever being misunderstood again. At some point in life, Gemini stops searching for someone who will finally listen. They realize the voice they've been waiting for. The one that comforts, guides, and lights the way has always been there, inside them, buried beneath the noise of the world. And so, instead of reaching outward, they turn inward gently, like a breeze returning to its source. That conversation isn't loud. It begins with silence. In that silence, Gemini sees the fragments of old memories, the ones that once hurt, the faces that made them lose faith, the words that caused them to close up. But this time, they don't run. They sit with it, look at it, and smile. No judgment, no blame, just understanding. They discover that within them are not one, but two voices, one of light, one of shadow. Both have been fighting to exist. The light wants to move forward, to love, to trust, to smile again. The shadow wants to keep them safe to stop, so they'll never be hurt once more. For so long they thought one had to disappear for peace to exist, but now they see the truth. Peace begins when the two finally listen to each other. And when that happens, their inner world begins to change. The old conflicts turn into rhythm. The wounds become carvings on the sculpture they've been patiently shaping all along. Intellect stops being a double-edged sword and becomes a lantern that lights the path. Emotion stops being a burden and becomes cool water flowing through the desert of the soul. Gemini starts speaking to themselves like to a dear friend. They ask, they listen, they forgive. Each morning, they no longer rush to be recognized, they move quietly toward balance. They realize peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from no longer needing to be. In that rare stillness, Gemini begins to shine in a new way. Not the blinding glow of attention, but the gentle light of awakening, the kind that listens, understands, and heals. And as that light expands, they feel themselves crossing an invisible threshold where all unnecessary words dissolve and only the heartbeat of the soul remains, honest, clear, and free. From that moment on, Gemini understands the dialogue with oneself never truly ends. It's a journey without a finish line, where every breath, every thought, every silence becomes a quiet answer the universe whispers back. And as they close their eyes, they can feel it, a part of their spirit awakening softly, warmly, ready to lead them into the next chapter of their inner journey, where love no longer arrives from the outside but begins from within. After seasons of love that left their cracks, and long nights spent sitting alone with their own thoughts, Gemini begins to understand real love doesn't arrive with lightning. It enters quietly, through peace. When the mind has survived countless waves, and the heart has already learned the weight of loss, they no longer seek someone who makes them tremble, but someone who helps them exhale. They no longer crave a love that's loud, but a love that knows how to stay silent. When the wind changes, Gemini once believed that to love was to understand, to touch, to analyze every glance, every word, every pause. But now they know. Love is the freedom to be yourself in someone else's presence. It's the comfort of not needing to explain, not needing to prove, not fearing that one day you'll be misunderstood. When they love again, they love with awareness. They no longer ask, "What can this person give me?" Instead, they whisper, "What beauty can I bring into their life?" In a world that rushes too fast, Gemini has slowed down. They listen to every breath, every silence between two sentences. They've learned to read what isn't said, to listen not just with the ears but with the heart. For them now, love is not a race to be chosen, but a shared walk where no one leads and no one is left behind. And along that walk, Gemini discovers the real power of words. Before, they used language to impress, to charm, to hide. Now, they speak to heal, to bring light to someone else's soul. Each word becomes a gentle current, carrying warmth into closed hearts. Their voice no longer tries to dazzle, it simply brings peace. The love of an awakened Gemini is not a fire that burns fast and fades. It's a small, steady flame tended with patience, gratitude, and presence. They know that everything changes, but when love is nurtured with sincerity, it never runs out. When Gemini learns to love with a conscious soul, the world around them transforms. They stop reacting to mistakes with pain and begin responding with understanding. They no longer hide from emotion, they welcome it, as a guest sent to teach them something sacred. For them now, love has become a spiritual practice, a quiet meditation woven into breath, into glances, into the smallest acts of care. Sometimes, they sit by the window and watch the sunset fall over the rooftops and smile, not because someone is waiting, but because they know their heart is ready, lighter, wider, brighter. They understand that love never arrives to complete us. It comes to remind us we were whole all along. And it's in that moment, when Gemini chooses peace over passion, that a new door gently opens. From the silence, a soft sound rises, not a voice from outside, but the echo of their own soul, inviting them deeper. Because beyond love itself lies purpose, a sacred calling. A journey where a heart that knows how to love becomes a light, guiding others home. And that, right there, is where Gemini's story begins to unfold again, warmer, brighter, and more meaningful than ever before. When Gemini finally steps out of their own silence, they are no longer speaking just to fill empty space. Their words become bridges, connecting two realms, the visible and the unseen, the human and the divine. They no longer use intellect to analyze, but to translate, to clarify the truths that the human heart has, always sought yet could never quite name. After walking through loneliness, Gemini understands the true weight of a single sound. They know that the right words, spoken at the right time, can save a soul, that a gentle tone can change the direction of a life. And so, they become messengers of the universe, chosen to translate the language of light into the language of humankind. In their eyes, the world is no longer made of separate pieces. Everything is woven together by invisible threads: thought, emotion, faith. They speak of pain, but not to reopen wounds. They speak of darkness, but only to guide others toward the light. Because Gemini has learned that every shadow is simply a fragment of light unseen, and that every conflict in human life carries a quiet lesson about balance. They no longer stand on one side or the other, they become the bridge between both, the peacemaker between reason and emotion, between the mind and the heart. An awakened Gemini can appear in many forms: a storyteller soothing souls through a late-night radio voice, a teacher planting seeds of understanding in young minds, a friend sending a quiet message just before someone gives up. Wherever they are, they share one purpose: to help humanity believe again in goodness and in the sacred power of soul-to-soul connection. As the world grows louder, their voice moves through the noise like a soft breeze across a desert, never shouting, never demanding, just touching hearts that have forgotten how to feel. They no longer need to speak much, because they now understand. Real power doesn't live in volume, but in frequency. A frequency of truth, compassion, and light. When Gemini speaks, people feel seen, heard, understood. Because their words do not come from logic, but from the meeting point of soul and universe. Their voice carries the breath of the sky, the warmth of the earth, the steady vibration of someone who has walked through the dark and still chosen love. And when they fall silent, that silence also speaks. It holds the language of faith, of presence. They no longer need to prove anything. Their very being radiates enough light to brighten a room. This is the mission of the awakened Gemini, not to make the world listen to them, but to remind the world that every human being can also be a vessel of light. When Gemini opens their heart to the universe, they become bearers of peace, carrying the whispers of the divine in every breath they take. And just when the world thinks it has finally understood them, Gemini smiles quietly, because they know their journey isn't over. There is still another realm of light ahead, where they will not only speak for the world to hear, but teach the world how to truly listen. When Gemini's soul reaches its highest vibration, every word they speak is no longer human language, it carries the breath of the divine. Their voice dissolves into the wind, soft, transparent, yet it makes hearts tremble with a feeling that can't quite be named. They no longer speak to be heard, they speak to illuminate. Each word they release becomes energy flowing gently into the places people often hide, into wounds, into old dreams, into the corners of forgiveness not yet found. Gemini realizes they were never just storytellers. They are the bridge between earth and sky. Every thought, every word, every breath they send into the air carries one message: that love is the only language capable of saving the world. They no longer seek applause, nor fear being misunderstood. For once the light of the universe has chosen them as its vessel, their only task is to open to let that current move through them, like water through a stream, gentle but powerful. In a world still chasing noise, Gemini becomes a symbol of speaking silence, a silence that has its own sound, the sound of healing. When they enter a room, the air itself softens. When they speak, it feels as if the listener is being wrapped in light. They are no longer here to explain the meaning of life, they are here to remind us of what it feels like to be alive, to feel grace, to believe again, to find beauty in the simple miracle of just being here. Because when Gemini reaches this state of soul, they become the voice of God, not because they are perfect, but because they are real. They know how to cry over small things. They know how to smile through adversity. They know when silence is the kindest answer and when to hold space for someone else's unspoken truth. They become a mirror of the universe's kindness, a quiet reminder that the sacred is never far away. It lives in the way we look at each other, in the words we choose, in the tenderness of being human. And perhaps the most beautiful revelation of all, Gemini no longer needs to shine to be seen. They only need to be sincere, whole, at peace. At that frequency, their light spreads effortlessly. If you're a Gemini listening right now, remember this: you were not born just to speak. You were born to touch souls with the breath of your being. Every time you choose kindness over pride, every time you listen with compassion, every time you forgive instead of judge, you are already speaking the language of the divine. Thank you, wind-born soul, for staying until the end of this journey. Thank you for allowing me to walk beside you through these layers of light, wisdom, and grace. Take a slow, deep breath and let this story settle quietly into your heart, like the sound of waves fading toward the shore. Somewhere in the wind, the universe is still listening. And you, Gemini, you are the one continuing this story now, with your own life,